Hi folks, this presentation is about Sweden's dragonflies, but if your expectation is for a full knowledge of Sweden's dragonflies, then you'd be better employing a Swede. Not only would they know more, they'd have more time spent in the field, and also likely the English would be better too. So what I am going to do is give you a perspective of someone who has travelled quite widely in Europe looking at dragonflies, also within the UK, and more pertinent for today, what I call a Scottish perspective. So that's what we're looking at. We, and my wife and I, have made at least 5 trips to Sweden in the last 10 years, although only one of them was specifically targeting dragonflies and also butterflies. On the start of my talk I will actually show perhaps more butterflies than dragonflies, but that will change as the talk goes on. So, we travelled, not surprisingly, to Stockholm, and from there we visited a number of sites, and these are indicated by these little blue blobs. And if we join them up, we can see the route we took. If we didn't actually stay overnight somewhere, there isn't a dot. So from Stockholm we travelled north and a little bit east to Öregrund, where we actually went to an offshore island to see some butterflies, but not so much dragonflies. We then did a loop north and west, and then came down to Skultuna, where we spent the rest of the trip doing day trips from there. So that's the area we covered, as I say, a bit north of Stockholm. We didn't cover a huge amount of ground. But if we just compare where we are and where we went to, there's something I think interesting comes out of it. If we draw a line of latitude, the area we went to was probably about equivalent to Fair Isle. And you wouldn't be surprised if I told you that it's a bit richer than Fair Isle in terms of dragonfly fauna. Of course, we know there are reasons for that, to do with evolution, geography, ice ages and the like, but nevertheless it's just amusing how far north we went and the species that we found there. So I've divided my little talk into 3 small sections, and here they are. We start with the Butterfly Road, and then we went to the canal, whose name I'm not going to mispronounce, and then we visited some sites in the Taiga belt. As you can see, it was actually in June 2016 that we actually visited, so therefore we did quite well on spring species, but the high summer species we missed out on. There was no Sympetrums and no Aishnas, unfortunately. So if you go to the Butterfly Road, which is obviously quite famed within Sweden, you'll find this board here, and you possibly can't make out what it's trying to say. If you go in a bit closer, you start to get an idea. The first column on the left is the Swedish name for a butterfly. The next column is the Latin name, some of which I can remember and relate to. I can see, for example, Cupido minimus, which is a little blue butterfly. It doesn't matter whether you can read that or not. The next column tells you how common or uncommon it is, and then finally there's a flight period. And I think the numbers within the blocks must be the frequency of sightings within these weeks. So what a tremendous resource, and I can't think of anywhere in Britain that could match that in telling you information about what was available locally. The Butterfly Road itself looks nothing special. It's quite scrubby, obviously quite varied, but you can't really say you're in a really special place. There's not very much bare ground, which is why I've included a shot of the path, which will also attract butterflies, and did. So what sort of butterflies did we find? Well, here's, for example, common swallowtail. Common is not a word I'm very fond of with any species, but there you go. And that's regarded as a fairly southern species. Another one is the black-veined white, And they are using the road and almost certainly taking salts. And you can always make a better picture when you can put a number of individuals in the picture at once, if they can be approximately in a line. Not surprisingly, we saw quite a few fritillaries, including some specialist north ones, but this is one that we're much more familiar with. This is pearl-bordered fritillary. I did get a lot of these pictures checked out by someone who was expert on the European fauna, because even although you know them in UK, there can still be slight differences when you go abroad. And we know the fritillaries are quite a difficult group. And we also saw variable damselfly. So that was nice, a nice male here. And you may see here a little theme developing. It's almost as though I'm in Argyll. Argyll is my favourite county in Scotland as far as insects are concerned, and I like to go there at least once every year in the summer and enjoy its richness. So this is Downy Emerald. I think it's a female and would be flying in June in Argyll. Just to slightly emphasise more this theme, we found this butterfly. Now, you possibly are confused as to whether you know what it is. It's a checkered skipper. However, it's not our checkered skipper, it's a different species called the northern checkered skipper. And this is a female, and the females do look a little bit like our checkered skipper, but the male, he looks rather different. And this is the male northern checkered skipper, and he is quite a stunner, I think, with all that burnished gold. So that was one of two butterflies which were very memorable, I thought, from that trip. We did see one or two other surprises. This is the small pincer tail on a Dragonflies forcipatus, and I've seen that one, generally speaking, in southern European countries like southern Spain and also in Bulgaria, so I was quite surprised to see that here. It's probably unlikely to colonise Scotland because it's one of the gomphids and we don't tend to have the right river systems or streams for attracting gomphids. So that's not really going to be a colonist anytime soon, in my view. And we also saw the first whiteface. This is dark whiteface, which is Leucorinia albifrons. And that was apparently the rarest of the whitefaces in Sweden, so our leader was really quite pleased to find it. Well, in fact, I found it, but he was able to identify it at the time. It would have probably taken me a little bit of book knowledge. So that was the Butterfly Road. And we move on to the second site, which was the canal. And you can see here, I've also subtitled it, How the Other Half Watch Insects. And you'll soon see why I've given that subtitle. And you can see also in the middle of the picture, our transport, which was a pontoon bedecked with Swedish flag to remind us where we are. So before we actually went on it, we did a little bit of exploring round about. And here's me trying to take a picture. From time to time I use a monopod and then I reject it and then come back to it, which I've been doing for probably about 40 years. And on that time I was actively using the monopod for steadying the camera. Like all these things, it has both advantages and disadvantages. So what did we see before we got on board? Well, it's the old warhorse 4-spot chaser quadrimaculata. And this is a species that gets all the way to Japan and all the way to North America in the more northern areas. It's a highly successful species. You might call it a gull of the dragonfly world. And just again, to emphasise that I could be in Argyll, this is marsh fritillary. I'm not quite sure how common or uncommon it is, but I imagine that the habitat was perfect for marsh fritillary there. So that was good to see. And again, even the backdrop looks argyle to me. Beautiful Demoiselle, Caloptrix virgo. But here's more of a surprise, a much more southern species as far as UK is concerned. This is Libellula fulva, what we call the scarce chaser. And this is a species which I checked and found is actually on the move within Sweden. It's moving north, moving quite quickly, colonising new areas. And of course that aspect of it is very difficult to appreciate on a single visit. Another species that's moving north is the emperor, but this is white-legged damselfly, another one we'd consider to be a southern UK species that likes moving water. And here's a pair in tandem, showing how the male has a much paler blue than most of the blue damselflies we're used to looking at. So the place we went to, the canal, it's a well-known site for a species we saw but didn't photograph, which is Epitheca bimaculata, which is the European basket tail. It's quite a big genus, but that's the only one in Europe. But we did see some other goodies. But when I say, how the other half watch insects, I'm referring to the fact that we're moving very slowly. There are drinks available. There's a packed lunch. There's shade if you want it. There's really nothing to worry about. And here's a bit of the canal. And you can see it's got plenty of lilies growing, which suggests that there's not any big stink pots move up and down. Anything is moving quite slowly, allowing the growth. And of course a lily pad can also be a perch, and we found stuff using the lily pads. This is red-eyed damselfly, so that's again a species we would regard as a bit southern, certainly not present in Scotland. But now we had a couple of new species for us. This is the lily pad, whiteface, which is Leucorinia caudalis. And you can see it's well named. It's resting on a lily pad amongst some mating beetles, and quite an attractive species. And another in the same genus is the yellow-spotted whiteface. This is Leucorinia pectoralis. So that was two new species for that genus in the one day, which is really quite a thrill. Our last little stop is taiga. We made a number of day trips into the taiga. And this is in foreground a beautiful stand of ragged robin. I couldn't help but trying to take a picture to show how stunning it was. So these northern forests are often not too dense, with plenty of damp bits around. And I found a ditch to stand in, but fortunately the ditch is not full of water, so I was able to enjoy more ragged robin in the company of this butterfly, which I thought was very attractive. This is the moorland clouded yellow, and you might recognise the idea of the clouded yellow, but this one has a really beautiful pink rim. So here's another shot of that. The colour combination I think is really quite stunning, with the slightly greenish yellow against the pink. Some sites you don't want to necessarily walk through, and this was one. So fortunately we had a boardwalk. This was a windy day, which made the photography particularly challenging here. Had we stepped off the boardwalk, we would have needed rather long waders, so we didn't. But we found this species, which is quite uncommon. Its status is vulnerable, and although it may look as though it's arrested, it's in the family of Synagrinidae, and this is Nihalenia speciosa, and because of the fact it's so small, it's usually called sedgeling or pygmy damselfly. And just to give you an idea of how small it is, as I say, it's the smallest damselfly in Europe and not terribly common. The wind did make it a little bit more difficult to photograph it, but I got a bit of a result and I was relatively pleased with that. We all like to see the biggest and the smallest and whatever. These are habitats which are relatively familiar to me and again evoke Argyll places where we see some of the more specialist Scottish species. But this was not a Scottish species, this was a Synagrian and a new one, and the male is on the left, and we know that the second segment is often critical in identification. It's not showing up as well as I would like, the male has just gone slightly out of focus, but just to show what it was, it's the one on the left, Johanssoni. And the marking actually drops quite a bit lower perhaps than it shows in the picture, which helps identification. So again, that was a new species one. It's a relatively northern species. And here I am back at work again, and I'm trying to photograph Baltic grayling. And Baltic grayling has a 2-year cycle, so unless you go in an even year, you have no chance of seeing it. But that's typical of me, I'm nearest to the subject if at all possible. Again, more species that we'd be familiar with on the west of Scotland. This is keeled skimmer. This was the only one we actually saw on the trip. It may be common, but on a short trip you can't really assess that. And then a far more expected species in a typical Scottish habitat is the whiteface, which European name is small whiteface, but we call white-faced darter, Leucarinia dubia, and the sphagnum provides quite a lot of camouflage. So you need to be patient and get it in a better environment. This is a female and a nicely perched male, showing its colour and also showing its face rather well. So we're moving almost towards summing up now, and one of the interesting things was the fact that the genus Leucarinia has 5 species in Europe, and they are listed below. And in order we've seen the first 4, so what about the last one? Well, ruby whiteface is actually the one that's most similar to ours, the small whiteface. It's regarded as a bit more robust, and there is another important difference. So I actually had to go through my pictures after the trip was finished and found that in fact I had photographed that species. This is Rubicunda, the ruby whiteface, and perhaps it doesn't show on your screen, I don't know, but the pterostigma are definitely reddish rather than black. This is obviously a male. But I also had another picture which was puzzling me. I'd taken it near the canal, and it was this species here. It looks like a whiteface, and it looks quite sturdy, but it didn't seem to quite work out. I was a bit unsure of the identification. So I went to a Facebook group for specialist dragonflies in the world and sought some advice. So I asked a question with the picture and said, you know, I'm stumped. This has got a stout body, black pterostigma and red-orange on thorax and abdomen. Can I please have an ID? And quickly I got a response. And the response said, Rubicunda, but question mark. So I thought I would ask another question. So I said, thank you very much, and said the pterostigma is black. Does that maybe happen to older individuals? As we know that colour can change as dragonflies get older, and I got a response to that fairly quickly from a different person. And what he said was, it's actually a female rubicunda, and he said they're not often seen, although he'd photographed one in Denmark. It's an andromorph being a female that takes on colour to make it look like a male. And the usual reason is to avert some of the aggression that males have on females within dragonflies. So that was great. It would have been better to have worked out for myself, but a little puzzle, and at the end a solution to the question about what it was. So that's the end of my trip that I made in June, but it's not quite the end of my presentation. The very following year we went back to Sweden, and we were there in April, and we weren't thinking about dragonflies, we were thinking about birds. In this marshy area we saw this damselfly here, and you can see it's very cryptically coloured, and that's for a good reason. This is winter damselfly, and winter damselfly is one of only 2 species in Europe which winters as an adult, and because of that it needs to be well camouflaged. There is another species further east, but this one is Sympecma fusca, and it has in fact been recorded in UK, so who knows, it obviously must be pretty tough to survive a Swedish winter as an adult. So we do have the sun setting and we have a Swedish forest, so it must be really the end this time. So thank you very much.